The first body hit the ambulance bay doors before anyone inside Mercy County General understood what was coming. A state trooper stumbled backward through the rain, one hand pressed to his throat, the other waving so violently he looked less like a cop than a man drowning on dry land. Behind him, red and blue lights strobed across the wet concrete, and then the first stretcher slammed out of the storm with a teenage girl on it, face gray, hair matted with blood, a shard of yellow paint stuck to her sleeve. School bus, yellow. Mass casualty, the paramedic yelled, his voice cracking over the shriek of tires and the metallic hiss of the bay door grinding open. Pile up on I-74. Tanker explosion. We've got kids, we've got burns, we've got entrapment. He stopped because the girl on the stretcher started seizing. Dr. Lena Mercer was already moving before he finished. Her coffee tipped over on the desk behind her and bled across a stack of discharge papers, but she never turned around. The emergency department had that particular smell it always had 10 minutes before disaster fully arrived. Bleach and burned coffee, and stale air conditioning. But now the storm pushed in with the patients, bringing diesel, wet asphalt, gasoline, hot rubber, and the faint iron smell of fresh blood. Trauma 1, Lena snapped. Move, move, move. Nurses peeled off walls. Orderlies broke into motion. A respiratory therapist dragged a ventilator so fast one wheel lifted off the tile. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered once, thunder shaking the glass front of the waiting room, and Lena caught a flash of her own reflection in the darkened monitor screen near triage. 41, dark hair pinned up too fast, mascara smudged from a 12-hour shift that had just become something else. She planted both hands on the seizing girl's shoulders. What's her name? No ID yet. Age? 14, maybe 15. Lena looked down at the yellow fabric again, and her stomach clenched so sharply she thought for one irrational second she'd been shot. Her daughter Emma's school colors. Her daughter's route used I-74 on Thursdays after debate practice. Get me to Avadavan. Prep for airway. Sam, where is County Dispatch? Her voice sounded calm. That was the trick after 20 years in medicine. You let your body panic somewhere deep and private, while your mouth became steel. Charge nurse Sam Ortega was at the desk already, barking bed assignments into a phone with one hand and typing with the other. Dispatch says, multiple vehicles, bus from Brookside High, fuel tanker jackknifed, sheriff's office on scene. Lena heard only 3 words, Brookside High. Her hand froze for half a second over the girl's sternum. Sam saw it. Sam knew her face too well. Lena. It was not soft. It was not comforting. It was a command. Lena inhaled once, hard enough to hurt. Tube her. She stepped aside as the respiratory team moved in, but she was already turning toward the bay because the second stretcher was coming and then the third, and then the shape of the night revealed itself all at once, like a curtain dropping. A boy no older than 17 with half his eyebrows burned off and both hands blistered raw. A bus driver with blood bubbling pink at the lips. A woman from one of the passenger cars screaming for a son who was not with her. Somewhere down the hall, a child was crying in that high, repetitive, exhausted way that meant shock was setting in. The waiting room TV still played a baseball game with the sound muted, absurdly bright against the chaos. Lena grabbed a pair of trauma shears and cut through the burned boy's varsity jacket. Brookside again. Name, she said. Caleb, he gasped. Caleb what? Donnelly, not Emma, not Emma, not Emma. She hated herself for the relief that moved through her faster than the shame. Caleb, listen to me. I need you to stay with me. Were you on the bus? His eyes rolled toward her, red-rimmed, terrified, searching her face for permission to fall apart. No, I was in the truck behind it. It blew up. I saw kids jump out the back. I saw... He started sobbing. His chest hitched against the oxygen mask. My sister's on the bus. Lena pressed a gloved hand to his shoulder and felt him trembling with a violence that had nothing to do with cold. We'll look for her. Another lie she might or might not be able to make true. The automatic doors burst open again. Deputy Cole Mercer came in soaked to the skin, uniform shirt blackened with rain, mud up to his knees, his jaw tight in the way it always got when he was 2 seconds from rage or grief, and trying not to show either. He and Lena locked eyes across the trauma bay, and for one dangerous instant, the rest of the room vanished. Cole was not her husband anymore. Not officially. Not after 8 months of sleeping in separate houses and signing papers neither of them had told Emma about yet. But the old reflex remained. She could still read catastrophe in the angle of his shoulders. He crossed to her in 4 strides. Emma wasn't on the bus, he said. Low, direct, no preamble. Her knees nearly gave. He caught her elbow before anyone else saw it happen. She got a ride with Harper's family after practice. She's at my place. She's okay. Relief rushed through her, so violently it felt nauseating. Then his grip tightened. But there's something else. Lena pulled her arm free because she could feel staff looking at them now, reading the electricity. Not now. It has to be now. His voice had dropped another level. One of the witnesses says the crash may not have been an accident. She stared at him. Monitors beeped. A patient moaned. Somewhere, someone yelled for O negative. The entire emergency department vibrated with urgency, but Cole's words cut through it like cold water. What are you saying? A pickup forced the bus over before the tanker hit. Witness says the truck belonged to Ben Ralston. Lena actually laughed. Once, out of disbelief. It came out ugly. Ben Ralston is drunk every other weekend and stupid every day. He didn't orchestrate a highway disaster. Ben Ralston works for your brother. That landed harder because it reached a part of her she kept barricaded. Her younger brother, Owen Mercer, owner of Mercer Development, donor to half the county board, charming in public, venomous in private. Men like Ben floated around him like metal shavings around a magnet. Lena looked away first. Then arrest Ben if you have evidence. We don't have evidence. We have smoke, rain, and 3 dead at the scene. Cole's face shifted then, something personal leaking through the deputy mask. And one of the dead is Pastor Gideon Vale. Lena blinked. What? He was in a sedan, 2 cars behind the bus. The name opened an old room in her mind that still smelled like hymn books, sweat, and floor polish. Gideon Vale had run New Covenant Fellowship outside town for 20 years. He had baptized half the county, buried the other half, and once told 16-year-old Lena that ambition in a woman was just vanity, dressed in useful shoes. She had not been in his church since her mother's funeral. You're sure? ID confirmed. Another stretcher blew past them, wheels rattling over the threshold seam. A paramedic shouted, "Incoming pediatric arrest." Lena was moving before the sentence ended. Whatever was unfolding on the highway, whatever secret Cole thought linked her brother to it, would have to wait because a small body was arriving, blue and still. The child was a girl, maybe 12. Soot streaked across her face like war paint. 1 sneaker gone. Found pulseless under the rear exit, the medic said. CPR en route, no response. Lena climbed onto a stool for leverage and started compressions. The girl's ribs gave under her palms with tiny, sickening pops. Come on, Lena muttered, not even aware she'd said it aloud. Sam pushed epinephrine, respiratory bagged. A second physician checked for cardiac activity and found none. The room narrowed to rhythm. Push, count, breathe, push. Each compression drove the smell of smoke out of the child's hair. Lena's shoulders burned. She kept going. Her mind, traitorous and fragmented under pressure, threw her the image of Emma at that age in a soccer uniform with orange slices tucked into a zip bag and dirt on both knees. She pushed harder. Again. Time became a blur, measured only by medication intervals and the growing quiet of the room around them. That terrible shift when experienced people start understanding what the body in front of them has already decided. Sam glanced at the clock. Lena refused to follow the look. Again. Lena. Again. The ultrasound probe showed a heart resting in absolute stillness. No flutter, no mercy. Lena stopped only when her own hands started shaking so badly she could not lock her elbows. For a moment, nobody spoke. Rain hammered the ambulance bay roof. The overhead speaker called for security in the waiting room. Then Lena stepped down from the stool and heard herself pronounce the time. The girl's face remained turned slightly toward the ceiling, mouth parted, lashes clumped from rainwater. A tiny silver cross hung around her neck on a chain blackened by soot. Sam covered the body. I'll notify the family. Lena stripped off her gloves. Under the harsh trauma room lights, the blood on them looked almost black. Cole was still by the doorway. She walked toward him because if she stood still, another second she might break apart in front of everybody. You said Gideon Vale is dead, she said. And you think Owen's employee ran a bus off the road. I think this county has too many men who believe consequences are for other people. That isn't an answer. It's what I've got. He looked past her then, toward the covered body, and something in his expression softened into plain human grief. The witness also said Pastor Vale got out of his car after the first impact. He was trying to reach the bus when the tanker blew. Lena almost wished she had not heard that. It was easier to keep the dead simple when you had reasons to hate them. Why would Gideon be on the interstate at that hour? She asked. Cole hesitated. That was new. Cole Mercer did not hesitate unless the truth was about to cost someone. Because according to the papers we found in his car, he was on his way to meet your mother's sister. Lena stared at him. My Aunt Judith lives in Missouri. Not anymore. No. She shook her head automatically, rejecting the fact before it fully formed. No. She vanished 15 years ago. Looks like she came back. A crash erupted from the nurse's station. Someone in the waiting room was screaming a name over and over. Lena turned instinctively and saw Emma pushing through security in a soaked hoodie, hair plastered to her cheeks, eyes huge and wild. Harper's mother was right behind her, trying and failing to hold her back. "Mom!" Emma shouted. Everything inside Lena dropped. She crossed the floor in 3 steps and grabbed her daughter by both shoulders. "You're supposed to be at your father's." Emma was breathing too fast. "I saw the news. They said Brookside bus. You weren't answering." "I'm working." "I know what working means." Tears mixed with rain on Emma's face, but anger was already coming in under the fear, 17 and sharp and wounded. "You always say that like it explains everything." Lena opened her mouth and had no immediate defense because some accusations were old enough to have roots. Cole came up beside them. "Emma, you need to go home." "Don't do that deputy voice with me." She swung toward him. "You both lied to me, didn't you?" Lena felt the air change. "What are you talking about?" Emma swallowed, chin trembling with the effort of not crying harder. Then she reached into her backpack, pulled out a folded packet of papers gone soft from the rain, and shoved them at Lena's chest. The top page was unmistakable, even through the water damage. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Filed 2 weeks ago. Emma's voice came out small and furious at the same time. "I found them in Dad's truck when I was looking for a charger. So while kids from my school are dying and this whole town is on fire, could one of you please tell me what else you've both decided I can survive without knowing?" Lena looked from the papers to her daughter's face to Cole's silence. And for the first time that night, the floor beneath her felt less stable than the highway outside. Behind them, another ambulance siren rose through the storm, growing louder, carrying the next piece of disaster toward the doors. And the sound hit Lena with a clarity that felt almost cruel, because the hospital did not care that her marriage had just spilled open in the middle of triage, did not care that her daughter's trust had cracked. At the exact second, her professional instincts were demanding every remaining ounce of attention. The emergency department wanted hands, decisions, signatures, blood, intubations, beds. It wanted function. Emma kept staring at her as if waiting for some expression that could organize the world again. Lena knew there wasn't one. She took the papers from Emma's hand slowly, buying half a breath, the pages limp and cold with rain. Cole reached for Emma's shoulder, and Emma jerked away before his fingers touched her. "Don't," she said. "Both of you, just don't." The waiting room lights flattened her face in a way that made her look younger than 17, all raw edges and fear. Harper's mother hovered behind her, drenched and apologetic, and not sure whether to leave or stay. Lena folded the petition once, then again, because she needed her hands doing something precise. "Emma, I need you to go upstairs to the staff lounge for 10 minutes, she said, keeping her voice low and even. "Mrs. Harper can stay with you. I will come talk to you as soon as I stabilize the new arrivals." Emma gave a short, unbelieving laugh that sounded too old for her. "You want to schedule this? I want to keep people alive." "That is always what you want." The sentence landed without volume, and that made it worse. Lena felt heat rise behind her eyes, anger and guilt braided so tightly they were impossible to separate. "Your mother is in the middle of a mass casualty incident," Cole said, too sharply. "This is not the time." Emma turned on him with a speed that made Harper's mother flinch. "You do not get to tell me what the time is. You both picked the time. You picked it when you signed those papers and hid them." Her voice broke on the last word, but she forced herself forward anyway. "How long?" Lena answered, because lying now would finish what the papers had started. 8 months. Emma blinked, as if she had misheard. 8 months? "We were trying to tell you when it was less chaotic." "Less chaotic than what, Mom? A bus explosion?" People were looking. Lena could feel it without turning her head. Nurses knew how not to stare directly, but hospitals were ecosystems built on noticing. Sam appeared at Lena's side like a shadow with a clipboard. "We've got 2 incoming criticals, 1 pediatric smoke inhalation, 1 abdominal trauma. ICU is full. We're boarding in post-op." Lena closed her eyes for half a second. When she opened them, Sam's expression had softened by a degree, enough to acknowledge the scene without entering it. "I can get Emma upstairs," Sam said. Emma folded her arms, defiant and shaking. "I'm not a toddler." "No," Sam said. "You're the daughter of an ER doctor in the middle of a county disaster. That makes you exactly the kind of person who thinks she should stand in the blast radius and exactly the kind I'm telling to move." For a moment, Emma looked like she might fight her too, but then the ambulance bay doors banged open and a stretcher came through, carrying a man with half his shirt cut away and his abdomen wrapped in towels already soaked red. The sight hit Emma at close range for the first time. Not television, not rumor. Blood, smell, noise, the wet choking sound of pain. Her face blanched. Lena stepped toward her and lowered her voice. Please. Upstairs. 10 minutes. Emma looked at the covered child's body near trauma 2, then back at her mother, and something in her posture caved inward. You should have told me, she whispered. I know. I hate that I found out like this. I know. It was all Lena had that was honest enough. Sam guided Emma and Harper's mother toward the secure hall doors. Cole started after them, but Emma didn't look back. Lena did not let herself watch them go. She turned on her heel and met the incoming stretcher head-on. What have we got? The paramedic rattled off vitals. Mechanism. Declining pressure. Suspected splenic rupture. Lena's body took over, and for 15 minutes there was no room for anything except suction, ultrasound, blood orders, the clamp of an arterial line between gloved fingers. Yet, the mind did not truly clear. It never did. Even as she leaned over the patient's chest, listening for diminished breath sounds, one part of her kept replaying Emma's face, the disbelief that had curdled into accusation. 8 months. Too long to call temporary, too short to call final. She and Cole had turned their marriage into a quiet administrative process, as if by containing the paperwork they might spare their daughter the emotional truth of it. Instead, they had created something worse, a lie with good intentions that still behaved like a lie. Pressure's crashing, a nurse said. Start the second unit. Call surgery again. Already did. They're tied up with a thoracotomy from the scene. Lena pressed the ultrasound probe harder, watching dark fluid bloom where it should not be. Then we stabilize here. She heard the steel in her own voice and wondered when exactly that tone had become easier than tenderness. Probably years ago. Probably before the separation. Probably before she admitted to herself that saving strangers came with a cost nobody applauded at home. An hour later, the surge had spread through every available room, every curtained alcove, every patch of wall where a monitor could be plugged in. The rain had not stopped. Through the ambulance bay windows, the parking lot looked submerged in pulsing red and blue. Local deputies tracked mud across the floor. A volunteer chaplain moved from family to family with a box of tissues and the exhausted face of someone discovering there was not enough language in the world. Lena washed her hands at a sink that never quite got warm. The water ran pink, then clear. Cole appeared beside her, still wet, the county seal dark on his shoulder. He waited until she turned off the faucet. I need 5 minutes, he said. You need a warrant, she replied. That's not funny. It wasn't a joke. She dried her hands slowly, buying herself time to decide whether she wanted to fight him or collapse against the wall. Where is Emma? Upstairs. Sam found her a blanket. She's pretending she doesn't need it. He watched Lena's face as he said it, maybe trying to offer comfort, maybe just reporting facts because facts were safer for both of them. Good. I told her I'd stay until you could talk. Thank you. The gratitude felt strange in her mouth. He glanced down the hall to make sure nobody was close enough to hear. The witness gave a fuller statement. Lena leaned back against the sink cabinet, exhaustion suddenly making her bones feel hollow. Do I want this now? No. But you need it now. He took out a damp notepad, pages wrinkled by rain. Truck seen tailing the bus for 6 miles. Black pickup, temporary contractor magnet on the door. Bus driver brakes near mile marker 112. Pickup swerves, clips the rear quarter. Bus jackknifes. Tanker can't stop. Lena crossed her arms, not from cold. And this connects to Owen how? The contractor magnet, said Mercer Utility Services. She stared at him. Owen's subsidiary. The one that handled site prep, trenching, fleet work. The one he used for the dirtiest labor because it insulated the main company. That could still be stolen. Maybe? Cole slipped the notepad away. But the plate fragments found on scene are from a truck registered to Ben Ralston. The name made something ugly tighten in Lena's stomach. She could see Ben's grin from county fundraisers, the way he laughed too loud and hovered too close around women, while Owen called him rough around the edges like that phrase, erased menace. Why would Ben target a school bus? She asked. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Cole hesitated, then added, Pastor Vale had a folder in his passenger seat. Real estate documents, land transfer records, some tied to New Covenant Fellowship, some tied to your Aunt Judith's old family trust. Judith has been missing since I was 26. Or hidden. From what? Cole held her gaze. That church, your brother. Pick whichever one scares you more. Lena almost snapped at him, but the words died because fear was already there, old and sedimented. Her childhood church had not been a cult in the cinematic sense. No robes or mass weddings or stockpiled weapons. It had been worse in the ordinary way. A closed ecosystem of shame, obedience, and private control dressed up as salvation. Pastor Vale advised marriages, finances, discipline. Owen had loved him. Their mother had feared him while insisting they needed him. Judith had been the only one who ever said, out loud, that Gideon collected leverage on people the way misers collected cash. Then Judith disappeared after a final screaming fight nobody explained to the children. Family myth replaced fact. She moved away. She was unstable. She was with a man. She stole money. Pick a story. Lena had spent years refusing to pick any. If Judith is back, she said quietly, why wouldn't she call me? Maybe she did. I would know. Cole's expression did not change, but his eyes did. Would you? Your brother had access to your mother's estate records, your old addresses, your hospital information back when he donated the East Wing. He's had access to half your life. The possibility entered her all at once, and she hated that it made sense. Owen liked controlling the flow of information. He called it protecting the family. What he meant was curating reality until people forgot there had been alternatives. A loud crash from treatment room 7 cut through the hallway, followed by swearing. Lena pushed off the cabinet. I have patience. Cole caught her wrist lightly. Not enough to stop her, just enough to make sure she looked at him. I'm going to Owen's office after this. If I call, answer. No matter what room you're in. You think he'll run? I think he'll smile. That answer was worse. She pulled free and headed back into the noise. By 2 a.m, the initial tidal wave had become something meaner and more complicated. Families arriving, identifications failing, rumors breeding faster than facts. The local news vans lined the far curb under the storm, antennas raised like insects. Someone had posted the bus crash online before all the parents were notified, and now the waiting room kept filling with people whose fear had been algorithmically amplified on the drive over. Lena moved through them like a machine built from caffeine, protocol, and denial. A father grabbed her sleeve to ask whether his son had been on the manifest. A grandmother demanded to see a body that had not yet been officially identified. An intern nearly cried after missing an IV twice, and Lena steadied his hands with more kindness than she felt capable of giving. She kept looking for a gap large enough to go upstairs to Emma, but catastrophe ate gaps for fuel. Around 3, Sam cornered her beside the medication room. You need to eat something. I need imaging to stop bottlenecking. Sam handed her half a protein bar anyway. Radiology is drowning. So are you. Lena took the bar because refusing would waste more time than accepting. Emma asleep? No. She's sitting on the floor by the vending machines pretending she doesn't hear every code overhead. Lena chewed once, swallowed dry. Did she ask for me? No. Sam's honesty was a blade but a useful one. She asked if her dad left. Did he? No. Sam studied her face for a beat. He's downstairs talking to state police. And before you ask, yes, the whole department knows something ugly is attached to this crash. It's that kind of night. Lena leaned back against the wall, the cinder block cool through her scrub top. On the other side of the door, someone laughed too loudly at something not funny. The brittle laughter of staff whose nervous systems had gone past full and looped back into absurdity. When did I get so bad at being a mother? She asked, not entirely meaning to say it aloud. Sam did not answer immediately. He unwrapped his own protein bar with the neatness of a man who liked giving people time to tell the truth if they were going to. You're not bad at being a mother, he said finally. You're excellent at functioning in crisis. Those are different skill sets. Lena let out a breath that almost became a laugh. That's not reassuring. I'm not trying to reassure you. I'm trying to keep you accurate. He nodded toward the stairwell. Go, 12 minutes, I'll cover. 12? 11 if you argue. She went. The staff lounge on the second floor was dim except for the humming vending machines and a TV muted on a weather channel. Emma sat on the floor with her back against the wall, knees pulled up, blanket around her shoulders like she'd accepted cold as a condition of existing. Her phone lay face down beside her. She looked up when Lena entered, then looked away. Lena sat across from her on the opposite wall, because taking the chair would feel like a power move, and because she was too tired to perform authority anyway. For a moment, neither spoke. The vending machine compressor kicked on with a low mechanical growl. Somewhere down the hall, a supply cart rattled. Lena folded and unfolded the edge of her scrub sleeve. I should have told you sooner, she said. Emma stared at the tile between them. Yes, there isn't a version of that where you weren't hurt. Then why wait? The question was simple, but simplicity could be brutal. Lena searched for a clean answer and found only pieces. Because your father and I kept hoping we could figure out whether this was a season or an ending. Because every week one of us was too angry or too tired to say it right. Because once we said it, it would become real for you, not just us. Because I told myself, protecting you from uncertainty was kinder than bringing you into it before we knew what we were doing. Emma finally looked at her. That sounds like something smart people say when they're scared. Lena nodded. It is. Emma's mouth trembled, then hardened. Was it because of him? No. Was it because of you? Lena understood the deeper question under that one, the one children ask without the exact vocabulary for betrayal. There wasn't someone else, she said. Not for me. Not for your dad. Emma wiped under one eye with the heel of her palm, angry at the tear for existing. Then what happened? The answer lived in 1,000 kitchen silences, missed recitals, resentments stacked so neatly they passed for maturity. We got good at surviving schedules, Lena said. Bad at each other. Emma gave a bitter little shrug. You could have just said that. I know. Downstairs, an overhead page crackled faintly through the ceiling speakers. Lena knew she had maybe 3 more minutes before duty came back with teeth. Whatever happens between your father and me, she said, we love you. That part is not changing. Emma looked almost insulted. Everyone says that like it fixes anything. It doesn't fix it. Lena forced herself not to rush. It just happens to be true. Emma pressed her forehead to her knees for a moment, then lifted it. Did you ever want to stay? Lena thought of the house they had built in stages, of Cole asleep on the couch after night shifts, of years when laughing with him had been easy and ordinary and enough. She thought of the months after her mother died, after Emma was born, after lawsuits and debt and his father's stroke and the church scandal that had touched Owen but somehow never stuck. She thought of all the times love had been present but not sufficient. Yes, she said, many times. That's part of why this took so long. Emma absorbed that in silence. Her expression changed slightly, not softer exactly, but less sharpened by pure shock. Is it final? She asked. Lena opened her mouth, then stopped, because 8 months ago she would have said no. 3 weeks ago maybe. Tonight, she did not know. She saw Cole in the hallway outside Owen's office in her mind, saw the folder from Gideon's car, saw the county about to split open along fault lines older than her marriage. I don't know, she said. Emma huffed a shaky breath. At least that sounds real. Lena's pager vibrated at her waist. Trauma consult, of course. She stood, then hesitated. Every instinct told her to touch Emma's shoulder, kiss her forehead, do something maternal and unmistakable. But gestures offered at the wrong moment could feel like stage directions. I have to go back down, she said. I know. Lena nodded once. At the door, Emma spoke again, so quietly Lena almost missed it. Mom, she turned. Don't let them lie to you about the bus. The sentence froze her in place. What do you mean? Emma looked suddenly unsure, as if the words had escaped before she knew whether she was ready. At debate practice, Harper heard her brother on the phone. He works part-time at Mercer Utility. He said there was a truck missing before the crash, and people were being told to say it was at a worksite in Dalton County. Lena stared at her exhaustion falling away under a colder kind of alertness. When did he say this? On the ride over. He didn't know I could hear. Lena's pager buzzed again. Insistent now, but the room had shifted. Family crisis. County corruption. Church ghosts. All of it threading together with the nauseating inevitability of a trap finally visible after years disguised as normal life. She looked at Emma and saw not just hurt now, but fear sharpened into awareness. Her child was standing at the threshold where adult knowledge entered, and innocence did not survive the crossing intact. Stay here, Lena said. Lock the lounge door if anyone but Sam or your father knocks. Emma's eyes widened. Mom, do it. Lena was already moving, the pager vibrating against her hip like a second pulse. As she hit the stairwell, her phone rang in her pocket. Cole, she answered on the second step. His voice came fast, low, controlled in the way men sound when control is the only thing between them and open fury. Lena, don't go to the main lobby. State police just detained Ben Ralston outside county admin, and he's saying Owen was supposed to meet Pastor Vale tonight. He's also saying the pickup wasn't aimed at the bus. Lena stopped on the landing, one hand gripping the rail so hard the metal bit into her palm. Then what was it aimed at? There was a beat on the line, rain and radio static behind him. It was aimed at Judith. It was aimed at Judith. The stairwell seemed to drop away beneath Lena's feet, not physically, but with that inner lurch that made the body distrust even stationary concrete. For 1 second, she saw her aunt as she had last seen her at 11 years old, standing in the Mercer driveway in a denim jacket with a split seam at one elbow, cigarette burning between 2 fingers, telling Lena's mother, "You can either keep pretending Gideon is a shepherd, or admit he's a collector." Then she was gone again, swallowed by 15 years of family silence, and now apparently somewhere inside the blast radius of a highway disaster that had already killed children. Lena forced air into her lungs. How do you know Judith was there? She asked. She started down the stairs again, fast now, shoes slapping the concrete, one hand braced on the rail because her knees had decided they no longer trusted the rest of her. Ben says Owen arranged a meeting between Vale and Judith at an old maintenance lot off County Road 8, Cole said. His voice carried that clipped professional rhythm he used when each fact had to pass through anger before becoming usable. Ben claims the pickup was supposed to intercept Judith before she reached the lot. Force her off, scare her, maybe stop her. He swears the bus was never the target. Lena hit the first-floor door hard enough that it banged the stopper and shuddered back. The emergency department swallowed her again at full volume. Monitors chirping, families murmuring, a toddler crying somewhere down the hall with the low, hoarse exhaustion of fear gone chronic. "You believe him?" she asked. "No. I believe panic makes men tell partial truths. I think he's minimizing what he was willing to do." Lena cut through the corridor toward trauma overflow. "Is Judith alive?" "Unknown." "That's not an answer. It's the only honest one I have." A transport team rushed past with a portable monitor, nearly clipping her shoulder. She flattened herself against the wall long enough to let them through. Jaw clenched so tightly the muscles near her ears ached. "Where's Owen?" "Lawyered up and heading to the hospital." That stopped her. "Why the hell is he coming here?" "Because Pastor Vale died on county property after leaving documents tied to your family, because half this town is already connecting Mercer Utility to the crash, and because your brother knows hospitals are where people go to perform concern in public." Cole took a breath on the other end, and when he spoke again his voice lost some of its official edge. "Lena, listen carefully. If he corners you before I get there, do not tell him anything about Emma hearing the truck story. Do not tell him anything about Judith. Do not let him walk you into one of those conversations where he says half a truth and watches you fill in the rest." She paused outside treatment room 9, one hand on the doorframe, watching a resident adjust a non-rebreather mask over a boy's face, while his mother mouthed silent prayers into both fists. "You make it sound like he's always been interrogating us." "He has." The simple certainty of that answer was more destabilizing than if Cole had shouted. Lena looked through the narrow window in the door at the mother's face, at the residents shaking hands, at the IV pump, alarming because something else always needed attention. "I have to work," she said. "I know. I'm 15 minutes out. State police are sending someone too, but Owen will get here first." The line clicked dead before she could say anything else. Lena shoved the phone into her pocket and stepped into the room. The patient on the bed was maybe 16, freckles visible even beneath the ash on his cheeks, lungs working too hard against smoke irritation. His mother stood at the head of the bed, rubbing the edge of his blanket between thumb and forefinger so repetitively it had become a compulsion rather than comfort. "Doctor, is he getting worse?" she asked. The second Lena crossed the threshold, Lena moved to the monitor, read numbers, listened to breath sounds, watched the boy's ribs lift beneath the thin hospital gown. Function first, panic later. "Not worse," she said, "but his airways are inflamed. We're going to keep him on oxygen and monitor him closely." The mother searched her face for hidden alarm. Lena had worn that same expression on the other side of beds, after Emma's appendectomy, after Cole's concussion, when a drunk driver had run a stop sign years ago. Families read medicine the way miners read canaries. "Will he need ICU?" "I don't think so right now." The boy gave a weak thumbs up from under the mask. "Told you I was fine," he rasped. His mother laughed once, broken and relieved all at once, then covered her mouth because guilt followed relief fast on nights like this. Lena made minor adjustments, left orders, touched the mother's shoulder for 1 second longer than strictly necessary, then moved on. Every room held a different version of the same question. Is this survivable? Is the person in front of me still the person who left home this morning? Can the world be stitched back into something recognizable by sunrise? The hospital kept answering with numbers, scans, medications, legal forms, but not the deeper thing anyone meant. By 4:30, the edge of the surge had dulled into grim procedure. A few patients had gone to surgery. One had died in CT. The bus driver was still ventilated, unstable, with blood in his chest and no family yet located because his ex-wife's number was disconnected. Lena wrote a note, signed a consent, washed her hands again, and as she turned away from the sink, she saw Owen standing at the end of the hall in a navy raincoat that looked too expensive for the hour, too dry for the weather, his silver hair neatly swept back, his expression calibrated to the exact midpoint between concern and outrage. Even from 30 feet away, he looked composed in a way that made her skin crawl. He had always known how to arrive in a room as though he were there to steady it. He started toward her with his palms open, as if approaching a frightened horse. "Lena." She did not move. Nurses glanced up and then away. They knew him. Everyone in the county knew him. Donor plaques had made sure of that. "Don't," she said. He stopped 3 feet short. pain settling politely across his features. I came as soon as I heard about the crash. That must have been a very busy drive. Something flickered in his eyes. Annoyance, maybe. But he smoothed it away almost before it existed. I know Cole has probably already said something reckless. Ben Ralston's truck hit that bus. Allegedly. Ben works for you. Ben worked for a subcontractor, servicing one of our utility divisions. There's a difference, and I expect the sheriff's office to understand it before they start throwing my family's name into this. Even now, he said family as though it belonged to him to define. Lena folded her arms because, if she didn't, she might hit him, and she was too tired to risk being honest with her hands. Pastor Vale is dead, she said. Owen's face lowered by a degree. The right amount for grief, though not the right texture. I know. Tragic. Why was he meeting Judith? There. No warm-up. No circling. Owen did something very small with his jaw. Most people would have missed it. Lena had grown up reading weather in him. You talked to Cole. Answer me. I haven't seen Judith in years. That isn't what I asked. He glanced down the hallway, measuring who might overhear. This is neither the time nor the place. Lena stepped closer. You lost the right to schedule truth for my convenience a long time ago. His expression hardened, not fully, just enough to show the old steel beneath the polished older brother persona. You are exhausted. Children are dead. You have a hospital full of injured people. Maybe focus on that before turning family gossip into a criminal conspiracy. The words family gossip lit something dangerous in her. Her voice dropped until it almost matched his. If you say gossip one more time about the woman who disappeared after accusing Gideon Vale of stealing from widows, I will forget this is a workplace. Owen's nostrils flared once. He leaned in, his own voice softening, which was always when he was most dangerous. Judith was unstable. She made accusations when she wanted money. You were 22 and already handling church property deals for Gideon. I was handling legal paperwork for a congregation that fed people and kept roofs over their heads. And moved land into shell entities. You don't. I know what you're talking about. Then explain it. For the first time, he looked not merely irritated but wary. He shifted his weight slightly, as if preparing to leave while preserving the appearance of staying. There are records that can be misunderstood, he said. Gideon had arrangements, donations routed through trusts, rural parcels held to protect them from county seizure. Judith wanted her share of something that was never hers. Lena stared at him. It was the first substantial admission he'd ever made, and he sounded offended by her inability to appreciate nuance. So you did know she was back. He realized the slip a fraction too late. I knew she had contacted someone. That doesn't mean I met her. Did you send Ben after her? Absolutely not. Too fast. Not because it was false, perhaps, but because he had rehearsed the denial on the drive over. Then why was Mercer Utility lying about the truck's location? Owen's face went still. What are you talking about? Lena said nothing. He studied her harder. Who told you that? A teenager with better instincts than most adults in this family. His eyes sharpened. Emma is here? The fact that he went there first filled Lena with a disgust so clean it almost calmed her. You don't get to pull concern out now like a handkerchief. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, a crash sounded from the waiting room, followed by a woman's scream so raw and immediate that the whole corridor turned toward it at once. Lena was already moving. Owen reached after her instinctively, fingertips brushing the fabric at her elbow, and she recoiled so hard it looked like he had burned her. The waiting room had ruptured into motion. A middle-aged man in a wet plaid coat was on the floor, clutching his chest. One chair overturned beside him, his wife kneeling by his head and shouting for help through sobs. Families pressed back against the walls. Security pushed through. Lena dropped to her knees, fingers finding the man's carotid pulse, counting, assessing, switching tracks with brutal speed. Get a monitor. Bring the crash cart. Sir, can you hear me? The man's eyes were open but unfocused. His skin gone, that waxy color that always stripped away age and individuality and replaced it with pure physiology. Owen had followed and stood uselessly at the perimeter, his expensive coat absurd against the linoleum in panic. Lena ignored him. She cut the man's shirt with trauma shears, placed leads, shouted for nitro, then recognized him a beat later through the sweat and distortion. Walter Pike, county clerk. He handled land records. Her stomach dropped even as her hands kept moving. Walter gasped. Folder, around the pane, one hand pawing weakly at his coat pocket. Lena reached in and found a thick manila envelope sealed with wet tape. County seal stamped across the front. Her brain registered too many possibilities at once. Give that to security, she said automatically. Walter grabbed her wrist with startling strength. No. His voice was a thread dragged over broken glass. Not him. His eyes slid toward Owen. The room seemed to inhale. Owen's face did not change, but the skin around his mouth tightened by a hair. Lena felt every gaze in the waiting room sharpen. "Dr. Mercer, we need to move him," a nurse said. Lena rose with the gurney team as they transferred Walter. He never let go of her wrist until the last possible second, and when he did, the envelope stayed in her hand. She climbed onto the moving bed platform for half a step to keep his eyes on her. "Walter, what's in this?" He swallowed hard, sweat pouring down into his ears. "Church deeds," he whispered. "Burials, girls." The last word barely existed as sound, more breath than syllable, but Lena heard it with total clarity. So did Owen. She did not need to turn to know. They rushed Walter into a treatment bay and shut the curtain. For the next 12 minutes, Lena became all motion again, because an acute MI did not care that its patient had just dropped a century of secrets into her hands. Meds. EKG. Consult cardiology. Watch for the pressure drop. Keep his wife informed without saying too much or too little. The envelope ended up on a stainless steel tray behind her, damp and accusatory. Once, while cardiology argued over transfer timing, Lena looked up and saw Owen outside the glass panel. Phone pressed to his ear, face gone pale in a way she had not seen since their father died. That frightened her more than if he had looked furious. Pale meant surprise. Surprise meant there were variables he did not control. Cole arrived 7 minutes later with 2 state troopers at his back. He met Lena outside Walter's bay, eyes taking in everything at once. Her expression, Owen 10 yards away, the envelope on the tray now under Sam's watch, the gathered electricity of staff pretending not to notice history mutating in their corridor. "You okay?" he asked. "No." "Good. That means you're reading this correctly." She almost laughed. Walter Pike came in clutching that. She nodded toward the envelope. "He told me not to give it to him." Cole's gaze slid to Owen. "That must have gone over well." Walter also said 2 other words. She hesitated, because speaking them aloud would make them real in a new and irreversible way. "What words?" Lena swallowed. The hospital sounds around them seemed to dim, though of course they hadn't. Panic simply had a way of building its own acoustics. "Burials," she said. "And girls." Cole's face changed. Not shock exactly. Confirmation with grief inside it. He held out his hand. "I need the envelope." Lena looked at it, then at him. Every institutional instinct told her to preserve chain of custody. Every personal instinct told her not to surrender the only hard thing any of them had touched tonight. "If I hand you this," she said, "and it confirms what Judith tried to expose, Owen will go after Emma the second he understands where the leak came from." Cole's answer came without hesitation. "Then I protect Emma." She looked at him. Really looked. At the rain drying in patches on his uniform. At the fatigue in the corners of his eyes. At the man she had spent months believing she could no longer reach in any honest way. Love did not suddenly flood back, clean and cinematic. It was rougher than that. Recognition, maybe. Memory of alliance. Memory of being less alone with him than without him. That was not the same as repair. It was enough for the moment. She picked up the envelope and placed it in his hand. Owen started toward them immediately, composure finally cracking at the edges. "That document is privileged," he snapped. "Under what privilege?" Cole asked without turning. "Clergy? Corporate? Family fantasy?" Owen stopped dead, fury and calculation warring across his face. State troopers moved subtly, enough to remind him that polished men could still be outnumbered. Lena felt her pager go off again, absurdly mundane against the weight of everything else. Another patient needed orders. Another body somewhere in the building was failing in a way unrelated to buried girls and stolen deeds. The world refused to pause for revelation. Walter's monitor alarm began to shrill inside the bay. Lena turned toward the sound automatically. Cole caught her eye. "Go save who you can," he said. "I'll do the rest." There was no promise in it that comforted. Only work divided between different kinds of damage. Lena went back through the curtain as cardiology shouted for amiodarone and Walter Pike's heart skidded toward disaster. While outside, in the fluorescent corridor of Mercy County General, the envelope in Cole's hands seemed to pull every lie the Mercer family had ever lived around itself like iron filings around a magnet. Inside the bay, the fluorescent lights seemed harsher than the corridor, bleaching Walter Pike's skin to a sick yellow-gray, while the cardiac monitor spat out an irregular, ugly rhythm that made the whole room feel mechanically anxious. Lena stepped back into position at his right side, hands moving before thought could fully catch up. "He's converting into ventricular tachycardia," the resident said, voice too high. "I can see that," Lena answered. Not cruelly, but without padding. "Push the amiodarone, pads on. Call cath lab again, and tell them, if they want him, they need to earn him." Walter's wife stood in the corner with both hands over her mouth, wedding ring flashing each time she trembled. She had the stunned look of someone who had walked into the hospital as one kind of person and had not yet understood she might leave as another. Lena caught her eye only long enough to say, "We're treating a dangerous heart rhythm. Stay with me." It was what doctors said when they needed family members not to collapse. Walter groaned and tried to roll his head toward the curtain, toward the hallway where Owen and Cole and the envelope had turned into a separate emergency. "No," he rasped. "Save your breath," Lena said, leaning down. "You want to tell me something. You keep your heart beating long enough to do it in full sentences." The words came out harder than she intended, but Walter's eyes sharpened in response. He understood command language. Some people did best when spoken to like they still belonged to the living. The resident pushed the medication. The respiratory therapist adjusted oxygen flow. The monitor stumbled, raced, widened, then for one hanging instant, seemed about to spill off the cliff into something fatal. Lena's hand hovered over the bed rail, ready to call for the shock. Then the rhythm narrowed again by degrees, ugly but perfusing. "There we go," she said under her breath, as if coaxing an animal. Her own pulse was too fast. Her entire body felt like it had been operating for hours on a temporary chemical grant that was due to expire without notice. She had gone beyond tired into that strange, lucid state where every texture became too vivid. The sting of sanitizer in a cracked knuckle, the damp cling of her scrub collar, the smell of plastic, sweat, and electrically warmed dust from the monitor vents. Pressure, 92 systolic and drifting. Bolus, keep him flat. Walter's wife took a half step forward. "Is he dying?" The question always arrived, stripped to its essence. No one ever asked whether the odds were favorable or the prognosis guarded. They asked the real thing, because catastrophe burned away euphemism. Lena looked at Walter, at the thin sheen of sweat on his upper lip, at the strain around his eyes, at the stubbornness that still remained even beneath the physiology. "Not right now," she said. It was true, which was the only currency she had left to spend. A cardiologist blew into the room a minute later, hair damp, tie crooked, irritation worn openly as a defense against the hour. He scanned the strips, examined Walter in 3 clipped motions, and said, "He needs the lab if we can keep him from crashing on the ride." Walter caught Lena's wrist as they prepared transfer. His grip was weaker now, but intent traveled through it clearly. He pulled her down until his mouth was near her ear. His breath smelled faintly metallic. "There's a ledger," he whispered. "Not in that envelope. Storage unit. Vale kept copies." Lena held still. "Where?" He swallowed, face tightening with pain. "Key taped under. Church office desk drawer. Judith knows." "Where is Judith?" His eyes slid out of focus for a second, then back. "She came to me last week. Wanted records. Said girls were buried without names on Mercerland, before it became Mercerland. Children from the fellowship home. Some pregnant. Some..." His throat worked around the rest. Lena felt something cold open inside her ribs and move outward. "Walter." "I changed the deeds," he said. Shame and panic twined so tightly in his face they were almost one expression. "Years ago, Gideon had signatures. Owen had appraisals. I told myself it was taxes, zoning, old cemetery transfers. Then I saw dates, ages. They said don't look too closely." His eyes filled. "I looked too late. The transport team moved in." Lena straightened as they unlocked the bed and prepared to roll. Her mind wanted to fracture into 10 directions at once. The hidden graves Walter was describing, the storage unit, the key under a desk drawer, Judith somewhere out in the dark or in a ditch or in a hospital unidentified, Emma upstairs, Cole in the corridor with evidence in his hands, Owen close enough to feel pressure on his polished smile. Instead, Lena forced her attention down to the next practical task. "You're going with him?" the cardiologist asked. She glanced toward the curtain, toward the emergency department beyond. "I can't." He nodded once. "No judgment, just triage hierarchy accepted as fact. Then keep him alive for the next 30 seconds while we move." They rolled. Lena walked alongside until the doors to the corridor swung open. Cole was there immediately, as if he had been standing guard over the threshold itself. Owen was farther back now with a state trooper at his shoulder, not restrained, not yet, but contained within optics he clearly despised. Lena caught only a piece of his expression before the gurney passed between them. Not fear exactly, but the fury of a man discovering his usual instruments of management were too blunt for the moment. Walter saw him too, even half-medicated and fighting ischemia. He lifted one trembling hand off the blanket and pointed. Not dramatically, not with accusation fit for a courtroom drama, but with the weary certainty of a clerk finally identifying what he had spent years filing around. "He knew," Walter said. The words were not loud, but they landed in the corridor with the peculiar force of quiet truth. Owen took one step forward. "Walter, you are confused." Cole moved to block him before Walter's wife even understood why she was starting to cry harder. "That's enough," Cole said. Lena watched the scene from 2 feet away and felt time split strangely. Part of her remained a physician, tracking whether Walter's oxygen tubing had kinked. Another part became a little girl again, standing in the vestibule of New Covenant, while Gideon Vale's sermons boomed through cheap speakers. And Owen, already handsome and already practiced, shook hands with adults who called him a good boy going places. He had always known how to align himself with authority before he grew into wielding it. Walter's wife stared between the men. "What is he talking about?" she asked no one and everyone. Lena opened her mouth and closed it. There was no answer she could give in a hallway with a crashing patient, and half the night's grief still dripping from the ceiling tiles. The transport team pushed through toward the elevator. Walter's hand dropped. Cole looked at Lena. Did he say anything else? She could not tell him about the storage unit key here, not with Owen reading faces from 10 feet away. "Yes," she said. "Later." Cole understood at once. A tiny nod. "Emma's still upstairs." Sam checked. Lena exhaled through her nose. Gratitude had become something too thin and constant tonight to name each time it appeared. Good. The elevator doors closed on Walter and the cardiology team. The corridor felt suddenly louder after their departure, as if silence had only been borrowed. Owen adjusted his cuffs, a small reclaiming gesture. "This is getting theatrical," he said. "A dying clerk mutters nonsense, and suddenly everyone wants to turn it into county legend." Lena looked at him properly now. His face was immaculate in the way wealthy men's faces often were. Careful rather than vain, but fatigue had begun to roughen the edges. He had not expected the night to become unmanageable. He had expected inconvenience, perhaps exposure of some limited sort, a cleanup operation. He had not expected the dead to leave paper, the living to speak, or his sister to remain functional enough to stop being useful. "Do you know what I remember most about Mom's funeral?" Lena asked. He frowned, caught off balance by the shift. "This is not. You stood at the church doors and greeted every donor by name, while Aunt Judith sat alone in the 4th pew, crying into both hands. I remember thinking you looked like a man at a ribbon cutting." Owen's face flattened. "That's cheap." "No. Cheap is pretending stewardship while girls disappear into unmarked ground." For the first time, some part of his mask cracked wide enough to show anger unbuffered by civility. "You have no idea what families carry to survive in a county like this." "Then educate me." He stepped closer, and the trooper beside him shifted automatically. Owen noticed and stopped, recalibrating. When he spoke again, his voice was low and almost intimate. The old brother voice reserved for manipulation disguised as disclosure. "You think this started with me?" "It didn't. Long before Mercer Development ever existed, before I signed anything, there were church homes, adoptions, disappearances no one asked about because the girls involved were inconvenient to everybody. Poor, troubled, pregnant, ashamed. Gideon made systems out of ugliness that was already here. I handled property, not bodies." Lena stared at him. The distinction sickened her, not just for what it was, but for how sincerely he seemed to believe it mattered. "So that's the defense," she said. "You only monetized the silence. I protected this family from ruin." "No, you protected yourself from daylight." He opened his mouth, then stopped because a nurse came running down the hall calling Lena's name. "Dr. Mercer." The bus driver's dropping his pressure again. The hospital reasserted its claim. Of course it did. Catastrophe was greedy, indifferent to personal timing. Lena looked at Owen once more, memorizing the fine tremor, now visible at the corner of his mouth. "Do not leave," she said. Not because she expected obedience, but because naming the command felt necessary. Cole answered for him. "He won't." Lena turned and ran. The bus driver was in critical care overflow, ventilator humming, skin mottled beneath the bruises, chest tube chamber already filling darker than it should. The room smelled of blood and damp linens, and the sterile, adhesive tang of fresh dressings. A trauma surgeon stood at the bedside with ultrasound gel on his gloves and murder in his eyes. The expression surgeons wore when anatomy refused to cooperate. "He's bleeding somewhere we haven't controlled," he said as Lena entered. "Ore's opening now." "How long?" "If transport doesn't get stuck behind half this county clogging our halls, 3 minutes." Lena checked the monitor, the pupils, the tube placement, everything that could be checked without solving the real problem. The bus driver's name was Randy Blevins, 48, divorced, 1 daughter in Kentucky, according to a line buried in his chart. She had not picked up any of the calls yet. Lena imagined waking to voicemail after voicemail from an unknown hospital number and learning your father was on a ventilator because a black pickup and a tanker and decades of hidden rot had intersected on the wrong highway at the wrong hour. Randy made a weak motion with his left hand. Reflex, maybe. Sedation, maybe too light. Lena leaned closer. His eyelids fluttered but did not open. "You're going to surgery," she said. Not because he could necessarily hear, but because bodies deserved narration when they were being moved through violence. "Stay where you are. Let us carry the rest." The surgeon snorted once. If words worked, we'd all be unemployed. Yet he said nothing against it. They moved Randy out fast, lines and drains swinging in controlled choreography. Once he was gone, Lena remained in the room a second too long, staring at the empty bed indentation, at the blood-smeared tape ripped from his chest hair, at the print the oxygen tubing had left across his cheek. Aftermath within aftermath. There were dozens of these little battlefields scattered through the department now, each with its own residue, each one waiting for environmental services and daylight to erase the visible evidence while the human evidence kept walking. She stripped off gloves and checked the clock. Nearly 5. Dawn still had not begun, but the quality of darkness beyond the windows had changed from absolute to expectant. The worst hour, the hour when adrenaline started settling its bill. Her phone vibrated. "Sam," she answered while moving. "What?" "Emma's gone." Lena stopped so hard her shoulder hit the wall. "What do you mean gone?" "I mean the lounge door is open and she is not in it." The corridor narrowed, sounds flattening. "Was Cole with her?" "No. He came downstairs with the troopers 10 minutes ago. Harper's mother left when Emma said she wanted to be alone. I checked 3 minutes ago and—" Lena was already running for the stairs. "Search the bathrooms, chapel, cafeteria, every exit. Do not call her yet if you can avoid it." "Why?" "Because if she's hiding, a ringing phone tells her we're panicking. If someone else has her phone—" She didn't finish. She didn't need to. The stairwell rose in front of her like punishment. She took it 2 steps at a time anyway, lungs burning. With each landing, a new possibility shoved itself forward. Emma, angry and wandering. Emma going after answers. Emma, hearing enough tonight to decide adults had forfeited their right to supervise. Emma, 17 and bright and hurt, doing the most Mercer thing possible, trying to solve a crisis alone because the family had trained her to mistrust what it withheld. Lena hit the second floor and shoved open the lounge door. Empty. Blanket on the floor. Vending machine light humming over nothing. Emma's phone still face down where she had left it earlier. That was worse than absence. Lena picked it up. Dead battery. On the small table by the coffee maker sat a yellow sticky note torn crooked from a pad. "Mom, I heard enough. If Judith is alive, someone needs to get to her before Uncle Owen does. Don't trust hospital security." Lena read it twice because the words refused to arrange themselves into a version compatible with continuing respiration. Under the note, in Emma's hurried block letters, was another line. Harper's brother said County Road 8 and the Old Fellowship Cemetery. Lena shut her eyes. The Old Fellowship Cemetery. She knew exactly where that was. Not on any modern town map. Not really. Just a fenced acre behind what used to be the girls' home before it was repurposed, and then sold and then folded into Mercer acreage, under zoning language so boring no one with a stable life would ever read it. Aunt Judith had once taken Lena there when she was 9, and told her, "Any place that hides its dead will lie about the living too." At the time, Lena had thought it was simply another bitter adult sentence. Now it returned as instruction. She called Cole. He picked up immediately. "I know," he said before she spoke. "Sam told me." She left a note. Lena heard her own voice and hated how close it was to breaking. "She thinks Judith is at the Old Fellowship Cemetery." Cole swore. One hard word stripped of all pretense. "Stay put." "No. Lena, no." She gripped the edge of the lounge table until the metal bent cold into her palm. "She is my daughter. She is out there because we taught her adults bury truth until children go dig for it themselves. I am not staying in this building." On the other end, she heard movement, radios, the open noise of the emergency department. Then his voice again, lower. "County Road 8 is already being canvassed. State police are there. State police don't know Emma." "Exactly." The answer came from somewhere deeper than panic. "They don't know what she does when she thinks she's right." Silence. Then, "Meet me at the ambulance bay in 90 seconds. Lena hung up and moved. Down the stairs, through the hall, past rooms full of other people's emergencies she was temporarily abandoning. At the nurse's station, Sam saw her face and did not waste time asking for justification. "Go," he said, already reaching for her patient list. "I'll hold what can be held." Lena touched his forearm once in passing. Too fast for thanks. The ambulance bay doors opened on wet pre-dawn air and the smell of rain-soaked asphalt. Cole's cruiser idled under the awning, lights off for once, engine shivering. He stood by the passenger side, jaw set, envelope gone, gun holstered, coat half-buttoned. For 1 second, they simply looked at each other, husband and wife in all but paperwork, both aware that stepping into that car meant crossing some threshold larger than geography. Not reconciliation, not yet, but joint consequence. "Owen?" Lena asked. "Troopers are holding him downstairs, pending formal questioning." He made 3 calls and stopped smiling. "Good." Cole opened the door for her. "It won't stay good." She got in. The seat was cold and smelled faintly of rain and leather, and the stale coffee that seemed embedded in every police vehicle in America. Cole slid behind the wheel and pulled out hard into the dark. Mercy County General receded in the mirror, all fluorescence and red strobes and trapped suffering, while ahead the road unspooled black through the storm-washed county where graves, lies, and at least one missing girl were waiting for morning to find them. Cole drove one-handed at first, the other hand on the radio mic, issuing clipped updates to dispatch while windshield wipers beat a relentless metronome across the glass. The rain had eased from pounding sheets to a cold, steady fall that silvered the road and turned every roadside ditch into a ribbon of reflected light. Fields opened on either side of them, flat and dark, and holding water. Utility poles strobed past in intervals. Every now and then, the cruiser headlights caught a mailbox, a rusted gate, a deer statue in someone's yard, the familiar American inventory of rural distance, each object briefly illuminated and then surrendered back to shadow. Lena sat rigid in the passenger seat with Emma's dead phone in her lap, her thumb rubbing the cracked corner of the case over and over until the repetition took on the shape of prayer. She was trying not to imagine too specifically. Too specifically meant Emma on wet gravel with a broken ankle, Emma in the back seat of someone else's truck, Emma standing in front of Judith, defiant and unprepared, Emma finding something in the ground that no 17-year-old should ever have to see. The mind offered images with obscene efficiency when denied facts. "Talk to me," Cole said without looking at her. She almost snapped that she was talking all night, talking to patients, to nurses, to cops, to a daughter they should have protected with honesty and failed, but she understood what he meant. Not noise, orientation. Keep her from disappearing into fear so large it stopped being useful. "County Road 8 forks after the water tower," she said, forcing memory into sequence. "Old Fellowship Cemetery is beyond the collapsed grain shed, past the tree line. There used to be a service road to the girls' home, but it washed out years ago." Cole nodded once. "State police have a unit searching the maintenance lot on the opposite side. I told them to reroute one car toward the cemetery without lights. Last thing we need is spooking Emma if she's still on foot." Lena let out a breath that shook at the end. "You think she drove?" "If she got a ride, it was probably from someone she trusted. If she stole a car, we'll know in 5 minutes when somebody starts screaming about it." He clicked the radio off for a moment, then added, quieter, "She may have gone on foot from the hospital to the parking lot and talked somebody into taking her. Emma has your voice when she wants adults to move out of her way." That almost became a smile, and then died. "That is not a quality I ever meant to pass on. We don't get to choose which parts take." They fell silent again. The heater hummed weakly. The dash lights painted Cole's face in dull green, sharpening the fatigue in the hollows beneath his eyes. He had taken off his hat, and his hair was damp and flattened at the temples. Lena realized with a strange, detached tenderness that she still knew the exact pattern of exhaustion on him, the way one shoulder rode slightly lower after long nights, the way his jaw shifted when he was holding down anger, so it would not interfere with procedure. Marriage paperwork had not erased fluency. It had only made using it more painful. "What happened downstairs after I left?" she asked. "With Owen." Cole kept his eyes on the road. Troopers walked him into consult room C to wait for detectives. He tried the donor route first, then the civic outrage route, then the family loyalty route. None of them landed. Did he ask about Emma? Twice. Lena's hand tightened around the dead phone. "That scares me more than if he'd denied knowing where she was." "Me too." Cole slowed at an intersection slick with runoff, tires hissing through shallow water. "I sent a deputy to your house and mine, just in case she doubled back." She didn't. The certainty came from somewhere primitive. Emma had left a note with location, purpose, urgency. She had inherited the Mercer compulsion to act once an internal threshold had been crossed. "No," Cole said after a beat. "Probably not." A blue sign flashed by. County Road 8, arrow bending right into deeper dark. Cole took the turn. The pavement narrowed and roughened almost immediately. Trees closed in closer to the road, their branches black and dripping. Mud striped the shoulders where heavy trucks had torn them up sometime in the last week. Lena watched the land change with the sick recognition of returning to a place your body remembered before your mind agreed to. This area had once belonged to the church's invisible geography, not merely land on a deed, but a system of meaning. The fellowship retreat house had been down here. The girls' home, the old cemetery where babies lost too soon were buried without fuss, and adults spoke about God's mercy, as though it were indistinguishable from institutional secrecy. She had not been back in nearly 20 years. Yet each bend felt familiar in the wrong way, like touching a scar under clothing and finding it exactly where it had always been. "I need to tell you something before we get there," Cole said. "No," Lena answered automatically. "Yes." His tone left little room. "I had child services sniffing around New Covenant 14 years ago. Anonymous tip. Underage girls, coercive adoptions, medical neglect. I pushed it up the chain. It died in county review." She turned to him so sharply her seatbelt locked. "You never told me. We were married 6 years and already fighting every time your brother's name came up. I had no proof, just a dead complaint and a file that vanished. Then Judith disappeared. And Owen framed it as one more family implosion you didn't want dragged through law enforcement." Rain whispered across the windshield. Lena stared at him, anger rising fast and hot because fatigue stripped away diplomacy. "You decided for me." "Yes." The answer was immediate. "And I've regretted it ever since." She wanted to stay furious. Fury was clean, but the road ahead was turning to ruts and memory, and beside her was the man who had made decisions for the same reason she had hidden divorce papers from their daughter. Fear dressed as protection. It did not absolve him. It only made the symmetry unbearable. How many people knew, she asked. Enough to bury it. Not enough to expose it. He exhaled slowly. "Lena, if what Walter said is true, then some version of this county has been complicit for a very long time. Not just Owen. Not just Gideon. I know." The words tasted like metal. That's what makes it feel inherited. Ahead, through the trees, a faint beam moved once and disappeared. Flashlight. Cole killed the cruiser's overhead running lights and eased off the accelerator. "That could be troopers," he said. "Or not." He pulled the car onto the muddy verge and cut the engine. The sudden silence was huge. Rain ticking on the hood, the cooling engine clicking softly, distant insects beginning to think about morning. Farther off, perhaps a generator or maybe just wind worrying tin against wood. Cole reached behind his seat, pulled out a high-powered flashlight, and checked his sidearm with the economical motion of habit. Lena unbuckled before he could tell her not to. The air outside hit cold and damp, smelling of wet grass, old leaves, diesel, and the deep dark water scent of overworked soil. Mud sucked at her shoes the second she stepped down. She wrapped her arms around herself once, not from cold but to hold her ribs together. Cole came around the hood. "Stay close. I'm not your civilian ride-along. Tonight you are exactly the person I'm trying to keep out of a crossfire." He shone the flashlight down the road. Twin-tire tracks vanished into the dark toward a rusted chain-link gate hanging open on one hinge. Beyond it, the land sloped gently toward the tree line. "That's the cemetery road," Lena said. "The fellowship kept it unmarked." Of course they did. They moved forward on foot. Every step made a wet sucking noise in the mud. The beam swept over broken fence posts, waist-high weeds, an old weathered sign half swallowed by vine growth. She could just make out the ghost of lettering beneath the moss. New Covenant Memorial Grounds. Memorial. As if language could sanitize what it concealed. Cole lifted the gate aside enough for them to squeeze through. The chain rattled with a sound that made Lena's teeth clench. Inside, the path narrowed to 2 vehicle ruts with grass between them. Trees pressed in, branches catching at her scrub sleeves. Somewhere ahead, a woman shouted, "Police!" and a second flashlight answered from the left. Troopers. Relief came so fast it almost made her knees buckle. But then she remembered relief was not the same as resolution. They rounded the last bend, and the cemetery opened before them. Small stones, older markers leaning at angles, a split-rail fence half collapsed along one edge. Beyond that, the darker rectangle of what used to be the girls' home foundation, now only concrete outlines, and one surviving chimney stump like a black tooth against the paling sky. 2 state troopers were near the far fence line, lights sweeping low across the ground. A third stood beside a mud-splattered sedan, idling with the driver's door open. Lena recognized the car instantly, not because she had ever seen it before, but because Mercer women all kept small practical cars, and this one carried the unglamorous signs of being lived in. Blanket on the back seat, grocery bag in the footwell, windshield crack beginning at the lower corner and traveling upward like a fault line. "Judith! Emma!" Lena shouted before she could stop herself. The sound tore through the trees and made one of the troopers turn hard. Cole shot her a look, not angry, just braced. "Emma!" she yelled again. No answer. Then from somewhere near the old chimney came a hoarse voice. "Keep your light down if you don't want to blind me." Lena's whole body pivoted toward it. A figure rose from behind the low concrete wall. Flashlight in one hand, coat wrapped tight, hair hanging wet and silver brown around a face Lena knew at once despite the decades. Judith Mercer had aged into sharpness. Her cheekbones were knives. Her mouth still had that corner-bent almost smile that suggested contempt and humor were cousins. But she was paler than she should have been. One side of her coat dark with mud, and there was blood drying at her temple. Emma stood beside her, drenched and furious and alive, a shovel clutched in both hands like she had appointed herself guardian of the dead. Relief hit Lena so violently she had to stop walking for half a second, or she would have fallen. Then fury followed it, equally strong. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she shouted at Emma, voice cracking. Emma flinched and then lifted her chin in the exact expression Lena hated seeing, because it was her own. Not waiting to be lied to again. Lena closed the distance faster, boots skidding in mud, and for 1 second she almost grabbed her daughter by the shoulders hard enough to shake her. Instead, she stopped inches away and pressed both hands against Emma's wet face, checking without admitting she was checking. No obvious injury. Cold skin, wide eyes, terror under defiance. "Do not ever do this to me again," Lena said. Emma's lower lip trembled once, then steadied. "I found her before they did." She glanced at Judith. "A truck came through 20 minutes ago and turned around when they saw lights." Cole was already with the troopers. All business now. "Make? Model?" Emma answered without taking her eyes off her mother. "Black pickup. Headlight out on the left." Cole swore softly and snapped instructions into his radio. Judith leaned against the chimney stump as if standing required more negotiation than she wanted anyone to see. Up close, Lena could see the bruise blooming along her jaw, the tear in one sleeve, the tremor in the hand holding the flashlight. "Hello, Lenny," Judith said. The childhood nickname nearly undid Lena more than the sight of her had. "Don't," Lena said, too fast. Because if Judith used the old name gently enough, years would collapse, and there was no room for that yet. Judith's expression shifted by a degree. Not offended, just registering damage. Fair enough. Emma looked between them, suddenly less certain, as though now that the person in the family legend was real, she did not know where to put her own anger. She was digging, Emma said. Or trying to. Lena followed the line of the shovel and saw the patch of raw earth near the fence. Rain softened and recently disturbed. Nearby lay a stack of photocopied maps weighted by a rock, several pages gone damp and curling at the edges. Grave plots, parcel overlays, handwritten dates. The trooper nearest them trained his light down and let out a low breath through his teeth. "Ma'am," he said to Judith, "you can't be excavating a site without." Judith cut him off with the exhausted impatience of someone who had outlived bureaucratic respect. "Young man, I've spent 15 years learning what permissions are for in this county. Mostly they are for stopping women before men, with property can be embarrassed." Cole crouched by the maps, scanning. "You identified a section?" Judith nodded toward the raw patch of ground. "Southwest quadrant. The records Walter helped me copy lined up with infant transfers and unregistered burials. Then I found death notes that weren't death notes, just initials, dates, gestational age, and a cross-reference to the fellowship home." Her voice thinned slightly on the last phrase, and Lena heard how much it cost her to stay composed. "I was going to the maintenance lot to meet Gideon and force him to hand over the ledger. He told me he was ready to confess because Walter had cardiac issues, and he didn't trust clerks with guilty consciences to live forever. Then Ben Ralston tried to run me off the road before I got there." "So you came here anyway," Lena said. "Of course I came here anyway." Judith looked at her, as if the answer were self-evident. By the time men start panicking, the evidence is either about to move or disappear. Emma spoke before Lena could. She was right. There are fresh tire tracks by the fence. Somebody already started scraping near the old markers. Cole and the troopers moved instantly, lights sweeping, boots cutting new lines through the mud. One called for the crime scene unit. Another went to photograph the disturbed ground. Dawn had begun to dilute the eastern sky by then. Not with warmth, but with a gray, punishing clarity that made every wet surface look colder. Birds had started somewhere in the trees, tentative and then more insistent, as if the natural world had decided morning was its own jurisdiction. Lena stood between Emma and Judith and felt the geometry of her life rearranging itself too fast to process. Daughter, aunt, husband, brother, The dead under the ground, the dead in the hospital, the dead on the highway because someone had chosen intimidation over exposure and lost control of violence halfway through the act. Emma set the shovel down slowly. Her hands were shaking now that immediate purpose had ebbed. "Are there really girls here?" she asked, the first true child's question she had asked all night. No strategy in it, no accusation, just horror asking for shape. Lena opened her mouth, but Judith answered first, and her voice was gentler than anything Lena remembered from childhood. "I think there are girls everywhere adults decided not to count," she said. "Here too, yes." Emma swallowed hard and looked at the raw patch of earth, as if it might answer back. Cole rose and came toward them, mud to his ankles, radio hissing at his shoulder. "Crime scene's on the way. So is the county coroner." He looked at Judith. "You need medical attention." Judith gave a tired snort. "I've needed medical attention since 1987. "Aunt Judith," Lena said, and the title felt both foreign and precise. "You're bleeding." Judith turned that bent almost smile toward her. "And you're still bossy. Some things survive." The attempt at humor landed crooked but human. Lena stepped closer despite herself and examined the gash at Judith's temple in the gray dawn. Not deep, but dirty, probably from the roadside ditch or the chimney stones. Her aunt smelled like cold rain, damp wool, cigarettes long since quit but somehow still lingering in fabric memory, and underneath it all the unmistakable smell of fear metabolized over hours. "Sit down before you fall down," Lena said. Judith looked as if she might argue, then sat on the concrete edge with a wince that revealed how badly the rest of her body must hurt. Emma hovered nearby, uncertain whether she belonged with the adults or needed to apologize for having become one too fast. Lena took her hand without looking at her, just reached and found it. Emma gripped back immediately, hard enough to hurt. Neither let go. Behind them, on the far side of the cemetery, a trooper shouted that he had found something metallic protruding from the soil near the disturbed section. Cole turned toward the sound, every line of him tightening. Lena knew that if they walked over and saw what waited there, the night would change again, from suspicion and paperwork and testimony into the irreversible bluntness of physical proof. She also knew the story was nearing the point beyond which lives no longer resumed their prior shapes. Morning was here. The county would wake. Reporters would gather. Owen would understand exactly how much had escaped containment. And whatever was in the ground would not only expose the dead, it would force the living to declare what they had been willing not to know. Cole looked back at Lena once before moving toward the trooper's voice, as if asking silently whether she was ready. She was not. She nodded anyway. Cole turned and crossed the mud toward the trooper's flashlight beam, while the sky over the trees lifted from charcoal to bruised gray, and Lena remained where she was for one suspended second, with Emma's hand locked in hers, and Judith breathing carefully on the concrete edge, all three of them arranged by chance and bloodline at the lip of something that could no longer be buried by paperwork. Then duty, fear, and curiosity pulled in the same direction, and Lena moved. The ground near the southwest fence had already turned to slurry under boots. Rainwater gathered in the shallow scrape where someone had begun disturbing the earth. A trooper knelt with gloved fingers brushing away mud from a rectangle of corroded metal that had caught on the shovel edge or on time itself and refused to stay hidden. It was not a coffin lid. Too small. Too thin. A plaque, maybe, or part of an old box clasp, or a marker stripped of context. The trooper shone his light more carefully, and everyone leaned in at once, the human instinct toward revelation momentarily stronger than reverence. The metal carried lettering under the mud. Cole crouched, angled the beam, and read aloud, voice flattened by control. "Baby girl, June 1998. Nobody spoke. The words landed with such terrible intimacy that the whole cemetery seemed to recoil around them. Not doctrine, not abstraction, not accounting language or trust transfers or county records. Baby girl. Lena felt Emma's fingers convulse around hers. Judith made a sound behind them, low and involuntary, the sound of someone hearing a ghost answer by name. Cole stood, face gone hard in a way Lena had seen only a few times in their marriage. Once after Emma's birth, when the cord had been around the baby's neck for too long and fear had transmuted to fury after relief. Once when his father's body had been lowered into frozen ground. And once after a domestic call where a man had broken his wife's orbital bone and still tried to act insulted by handcuffs. This was that face now. Not theatrical anger. Not heat. Judgment stripped to function. He keyed his radio. "Crime scene, expedite. Coroner, expedite. I need the state investigator here now." The trooper by the fence looked up. "Sir, there may be more." Cole answered without turning. "There are more." His certainty chilled Lena more than the discovery had because it meant some part of all of them had already known the shape of the truth, had simply kept it unsaid to preserve the possibility of lesser horror. Emma let go of Lena's hand and wrapped both arms around herself. The defiance that had carried her out here was draining, leaving 17 exposed in the damp dawn. Lena reached for her again, but Emma took one step back first, not rejecting her exactly, just trying to find a position from which she could see all of it without being touched by any one adult's version. "How many?" Emma asked, voice thin. No one answered immediately because numbers would have been lies, and because the mind resisted multiplication when one unnamed infant already felt unendurable. Judith pushed herself up from the concrete with visible effort. "At least 7 in the files I copied," she said. Likely more if Gideon kept separate ledgers. Her face had gone whiter in the morning light. Blood at her temple dark and brittle. Some were called stillbirths. Some were never called anything. Emma stared at the disturbed earth as if trying to force it to remain singular, containable. Were they murdered? The word looked too big in her mouth, too adult. Yet there it was. Judith swallowed. "I don't know all of it. Some girls were sent away pregnant and came back empty and quiet. Some didn't come back. Some babies were taken. Some buried. Some entered into adoption chains that never matched county records. Gideon said suffering needed management. Your uncle said risk needed management. Men like that build whole moral systems around not using ugly words." Lena looked at Judith sharply. "You knew enough to disappear and never came back for me." The sentence escaped before she fully chose it. It hung there, rawer than any legal accusation, because Dawn had a way of making old wounds seem less decorous. Judith turned her head slowly. Her eyes, beneath the exhaustion, were not evasive. "I came back twice," she said. "Once when your mother was dying, and Owen had me turned away from the house before you got there. Once, 3 years later, when Emma was a baby and I saw your brother's car in your driveway and decided I would bring poison with me if I came through that door." Lena stared at her. There were moments when new information did not feel additive but rearranging, as if the past itself had been built on removable walls. "Why didn't you call?" "Because phones can be traced, letters intercepted, and shame taught me to distrust the rescue instincts of families that survive by protecting the wrong people." Judith's mouth twisted. "Also because I was a coward at least a third of the time, which I'd prefer not to romanticize." Lena wanted to stay angry. Anger was easier than recalibrating grief, but she also saw the woman in front of her as she truly was for the first time, not as family folklore had preserved her, not just bitter, not just vanished, but hunted by memory, and practical enough to know that returning without proof would only feed the machine she was trying to stop. The fact that Lena might have done the same under different pressures did not heal anything. It only made blame more distributed and therefore more painful. A convoy of vehicles approached along the muddy access road. Then, tires grinding slow, lights muted in the growing day. Crime scene van, coroner's SUV, another county unit. With them came inevitability. Uniformed people stepped out carrying cases, tape, cameras, measuring rods, latex gloves, the strange ritual equipment by which society pretended it could face its hidden dead methodically enough to stay civilized. Cole moved to intercept the lead investigator, a woman in a state jacket with cropped gray hair and the expression of someone who had outlived sentimental surprise. Lena watched his posture as he briefed her. Not just professional now, personal, though he would hate the word. This was his county too. His daughter standing 15 yards away, his wife in scrubs and mud, his in-laws turning into evidence. He caught Lena's eye once across the tape they were already unspooling, and the look passed between them quickly, almost illegally intimate in its clarity. There will be no clean way through this. She understood. So did he. The investigator approached Judith next. "Ma'am, I'm going to need a full statement, but first I need EMS to check that head wound." Judith gave a tired laugh. "I grew up in this county. If I agreed to treatment every time a man hit me with something, I'd never have gotten out of a waiting room." The investigator did not smile. "This is not a suggestion." Lena stepped in before Judith could weaponize more sarcasm against her own skull fracture. "She needs sutures and probably imaging. Possible concussion." Emma looked at her mother then, the physician voice returning over the woman voice, and something in her expression shifted from pure accusation toward the confused beginnings of trust rebuilt under duress. "You're going back to the hospital?" Emma asked. And the question carried more than geography. Back to duty. Back to the place you choose over home. Lena answered honestly because the night had stripped strategy from her. "Yes, and I need you with me." Emma glanced toward the disturbed earth, toward the plaque, toward Judith. "I don't want to leave before they know." "They know enough to begin," Cole said, joining them. Mud streaked one knee of his uniform. "And you do not need to stand here while they pull history out of the ground." Emma's chin lifted again, reflexive. Maybe I do. Cole looked at her, not as deputy now but as father. And Lena saw the cost of that gaze because he was trying to hold authority without crushing the exact courage that had brought Emma here alive. You need not to make this the day you watch your county become what it has always been, with your own eyes at 6 in the morning after a trauma night and a family implosion, he said. You can know something without giving it every possible piece of yourself all at once. Emma's face crumpled by a degree, not enough to become tears yet, but enough to show childhood still present under the emergency self she had been wearing. You don't get to talk to me like you didn't hide everything too. Cole absorbed that without defense. I know. Emma looked away first. The investigator interrupted gently but efficiently. Sheriff Mercer, transport is ready for Miss Mercer. Judith snorted. Which one? It was such a badly timed, perfectly family joke that Lena almost laughed and hated herself for it. Cole pointed toward the waiting ambulance at the gate. Older one first. Judith rose carefully. When she swayed, Lena caught her elbow on instinct. Judith looked down at the hand on her sleeve, then up at Lena's face. You got your mother's hands, she said. Useful. Before they became tired. The comment landed in the soft tissue under Lena's sternum, where grief still lived like an old shard. Don't sentimentalize me, she said, but there was no heat in it. Judith's mouth bent. I was aiming for observational. Emma moved closer as they walked Judith toward the ambulance. The crime scene team behind them was already kneeling by the disturbed section, photographing, marking, preserving. One technician gently covered the exposed plaque with a clean evidence shield, as if sheltering language from the weather. Over the trees, the first true band of pale morning spread east, flat and merciless. Lena wondered what the county would look like in 2 hours when school parents woke to crash updates and then learned the Mercer name was attached not only to the road, but to buried infants and vanished girls. She wondered whether Owen was in custody or still negotiating the price of public dignity. She wondered how many men in local office were already calling lawyers before coffee. She wondered if the bus driver was alive in surgery, if Walter Pike had reached the cath lab in time, if the little girl in Trauma 2 had parents now making choices about funeral clothes while state investigators cordoned off an old cemetery the child had never heard of. Disaster never arrived as one story. It always came braided. At the ambulance, the EMT opened the rear doors and guided Judith up the step. Judith paused halfway, turning back not toward Lena first but toward Emma. Thank you for being reckless in the correct direction, she said. Emma gave a small, stunned huff that was almost a laugh. I think my mom would say there isn't one. Judith's gaze slid to Lena. That because she mistakes survival for obedience sometimes. Get in the ambulance, Lena said. Judith did. The doors shut. The vehicle rolled out slow through the mud. For a second, Lena watched it go, with the uncanny feeling of seeing a person return from the dead, only to be carried off toward fluorescent uncertainty, like any other injured body. Cole came to stand beside her. The space between them held years. It also held mud, rain, their daughter's breathing, and a county peeling itself open by layers. I need to go in with Judith, Lena said. Head wound, statement, chain of medical care, and the hospital is still a war zone. Cole nodded. I know. Emma looked from one to the other. And me? The question was small now, more frightening for its size. Not where geographically. Where in the aftermath? Where in their marriage? Where in the moral map of a family she had just watched detonate? Lena faced her daughter fully. There, in the washed-out dawn with crime scene tape flicking in the light breeze, and troopers moving behind them like figures in some procedural drama too ugly to fictionalize, she understood that every instinct she and Cole had used to delay pain had produced greater damage. Protection without truth was just a prettier form of abandonment. You come with me, Lena said. Not because you can't handle things, because you shouldn't have to handle all of them alone. Emma stared at her, searching for the trick inside the sentence. Finding none, she nodded once. Cole exhaled, a sound so faint it barely counted as one. I have to stay, he said. Interviews, warrants, scene coordination. If they find more, he didn't finish. He didn't need to. Emma studied him for a second, then asked, Are you arresting Uncle Owen? Cole answered the only way he could. I'm following evidence. Emma's face tightened. That's not yes. No. He held her gaze. It's not. Morning had made everyone too visible for easy lies. Emma wrapped her arms around herself again and looked out at the cemetery where technicians were beginning the slow violence of careful excavation. I thought tonight was about the bus, she said. It was, Lena said quietly. And it was about everything under it. Emma pressed her lips together, then turned to her father. If you don't stop him because he's family, I will never forgive either of you. The words were aimed at both parents with surgical fairness. Cole took them and nodded. Understood. Lena watched the sentence land on him and knew it had struck the exact place it needed to. Not performative, moral awakening. Obligation distilled by the one witness whose judgment still mattered most. A deputy jogged up then, breath fogging in the cool air. "Sheriff, detectives just called from the hospital. Owen's attorney got there before booking, but Walter Pike's wife is requesting protective detail and says there's a safe deposit key in their home tied to church transfers. Also, Pastor Vale's car search turned up a second phone, with voicemail from a woman identifying herself as Judith Mercer." Cole swore softly. The deputy continued. "And county admin wants a statement before media starts asking why state crime scene is at an old church burial ground." Cole rubbed one hand over his face. When he dropped it, he looked older than he had in the cruiser an hour ago. Not weaker. Just stripped. "Tell county admin they'll get a statement when I know which century of corruption I'm speaking for." The deputy blinked, nodded, and hurried off. Emma glanced at her father with a flash of startled respect. It vanished quickly, but Lena saw it. Small things still moved beneath the wreckage. Cole turned back to them. "You need to go now before the road turns into reporters and gawkers." Lena knew he was right. She also knew leaving him here felt like reenacting too many prior separations, practical and necessary and corrosive. "You'll call?" she asked. "Even if it's bad." His answer came steady. "Especially if it's bad. There was a time in their marriage when that would have been enough to rebuild a bridge on the spot. It was no longer enough. But it was still a plank." Lena accepted it for what it was. She put one hand briefly against his chest, over the damp uniform, feeling the living thud beneath. A gesture too intimate for colleagues, too insufficient for spouses, exactly right for this fractured middle territory. Then she stepped back. Emma hesitated, then moved forward and hugged him hard. Once. Fast. The way children do when they are trying not to reveal they still need parents after making adult threats. Cole held her as if he had been waiting all night to remember how. When she pulled away, his face had changed by some invisible measure. "Go with your mother," he said. "And this time, answer when she calls." Emma almost rolled her eyes, but instead she said, "Only if she does too." Lena made a helpless noise that might have been a laugh or surrender. Then she took Emma's hand again and started toward the road, where another unit had offered them transport back to Mercy County General. Behind them, the cemetery kept filling with officials, evidence flags, cameras, and the irreversible grammar of exhumation. Ahead waited the hospital with its injured, its witnesses, its brother in holding, its aunt, in need of sutures, and a daughter who now knew enough to demand not comfort, but honesty. In the back seat of the county SUV, as they pulled away and the tape and trees receded behind them, Emma leaned her head against the window and said without looking at Lena, "Are you and Dad still getting divorced?" The question arrived so plainly that any evasive answer would have stained the whole morning. Lena watched the wet road ahead for a beat, then chose the things she could defend later as true. "I don't know what we're called after this," she said. "I know we can't go back to lying because we think it's kinder." Emma nodded against the glass. "Good." She was quiet for another mile, then added, "I'm still mad." "You should be." "And I'm scared." Lena reached across the seat and laid her hand over Emma's. "Me too." Outside, dawn widened over fields and gas stations and school parking lots and courthouse lawns, over all the ordinary American surfaces beneath which systems had been hidden in plain sight for years. The county would keep functioning because that was what counties did. School buses would eventually run again. Grocery stores would open. Men in pressed shirts would hold microphones. Families would make casseroles for the injured and look away from the deeper wound if looking asked too much of them. Mercy County would survive. That was not the same as being innocent. By the time the hospital came into view again, squat and bright against the washed-out sky, Lena understood that saving one thing had already fractured another. The bus crash had exposed the ground. The ground had exposed the family. The family, if it was to remain anything other than a chain of managed silences, would have to survive exposure too. She did not know whether her marriage would live through it, whether Owen would go to prison, whether Judith's testimony and Walter's records and the graves in the cemetery would be enough to cut through the county's old reflexes toward self-protection. She knew only that the dead had entered the conversation, and the living would no longer get to decide alone what counted as truth. The SUV rolled under the ambulance bay awning. Nurses moved in and out through the sliding doors. Somewhere inside, monitors were still alarming. Somewhere upstairs, a trauma surgeon or cardiologist or exhausted resident was finishing the work the night had begun. Lena squeezed Emma's hand once before opening the door, and when they stepped out together into the cold hospital morning, there was no peace waiting for them, only the next necessary thing, and the knowledge that, for the first time in a very long while, necessary and honest, might finally be the same.